I am once again delighted to be joined by Operator Starsky. I think to most of you, he will need no introduction. A former Ukrainian guardsman, has extraordinary amount of experience, and of course played, along with many other tens or even hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians, a heroic role in those early stages of the invasion as well. We won't go into sort of all the details of the story because unfortunately there are so many things to discuss as usual. There are breaking stories left, right, and centre. It's becoming quite difficult to catch up with them all. Before we jump in, thank you to everyone who's subscribed to the channel. Thank you to everyone who follows all the creators in this space. Your support, your encouragement, and especially if that's financial, is incredibly well received. Don't forget as well to support Ukrainian charities. We are currently fundraising to buy trucks for Ukrainian regiments. We're working through a Ukrainian charity with that. It's the same one that we worked with in December. And many of you will have seen the evidence of the trucks that got graphicked and sent to the front lines and how incredibly impactful that is. So if you can help our Easter campaign along, please do. There will be a link in the description. Operator Starsky, welcome back.
Hello, hello. Thank you so much for the invitation, dear Jonathan, dear viewers. Always a pleasure to be here.
Always a tremendous pleasure. And of course, insightful, because it seems to me that following this 3 years, day in, day out, there are excellent journalists, of course, in the mainstream media. People like Luke Harding, Caleb Robertson, others. Well, he's not quite mainstream. There are quite a few good voices, but unfortunately, the vast bulk of news seems to lack context. So when Trump pops up and says, I'm very bad with Putin, he's been a naughty boy, he's not going along with my deals, it's not happening fast enough, he keeps, sending those missiles and it's terrible and he's very concerned about the humanity of it all. He's not taking any action. He's taken action to deprive Ukraine of aid. He's taken action to deprive Ukraine of intelligence data. But have you discerned any actual actions that might give Putin any cause for concern at all?
First of all, when I think about Donald Trump, I don't really remember any case when he helped Ukraine since 2022. I'm sorry, but this is fact. Never happened. Okay, you can Google, you can ask ChatGPT. I tried. As for his actions, when in the beginning, when he just got inaugurated and people were saying, guys, just let him do his stuff, okay? It's almost end of March, and we don't see any actions that would help Ukraine in any way, because whatever was happening keeps happening. We can see increased Russian strikes. We can see Ukrainian army having to withdraw from Suja because Trump got the intelligence that was absolutely crucial for Ukrainian army in that area, especially that time. So when he starts when he starts those little grudges against Putin in social media, doesn't mean anything at all. First thing, even analyzing Trump's narratives and Trump's statements is an extremely unhealthy thing, right? It can damage your brain big time. That's why I quit doing this. Okay, I had enough of his narratives that we could hear in 2024 when he talked about not willing to help Ukraine win the war during the debates. That was enough, basically. Okay. And this year, when he calls President Zelensky a dictator, and then he's pissed off at Putin for calling President Zelensky a dictator. What the hell is going on here? I don't know. I think we can only describe it with the word "пиздец," which is something that we both understand, but I have no idea. Guys, Russians will not be persuaded to quit attacking Ukraine, because attacking Ukraine and capturing Ukraine in the end is Russia's strategy. This is their main goal. Not many things can happen in this world to make Putin change his strategic goal of capturing Ukraine. And it's not just about uh, like half of Ukraine, Yugoslavia, right, southeast or whatever, is the whole Ukraine. And they were talking about like the foundation of their strategy in the Istanbul protocols, right? They expressed their demands of Ukraine's capitulation there. Basically, people can read it. But there is absolutely no way Trump can make Putin change his strategic goals. He can make Putin change his narratives, and Putin will be saying, yes, I want peace even more than I wanted it yesterday. You see, I already ordered all of my troops to stop bombing Ukrainian cities, Ukrainian hospitals, Ukrainian kindergartens. We don't strike them for a month already. Trust me, you know.
He even
And
shot his own drones down. You know, they sent the drones and they shot their own drones down. And then a day later, one of the exquisite Russian propagandists just sort of was openly laughing at US diplomats. We didn't shoot them down.
of course, and even if they had shot down those 7 drones, then anyways, those 170 drones kept flying towards Ukraine and striking an energy facility in Slovyansk and other places. In Dnipro, we also have reports of damage done to the energy infrastructure. But according to Russians, since 18th of March, they stopped striking Ukrainian infrastructure. And according to Trump, he believes this. So it seems as if we live in like 2 parallel realities, even 3 parallel realities, because what we can read on Trump's social media is absolutely disconnected from what Trump says on a TV, as if the person who runs his social media is a different person. It's not Trump, or maybe it's the real Trump, and we can also only see like a doppelganger. I have no idea.
Like Putin's doubles. It's as if you allowed them to say stuff and not just look weird and absurd in their uniforms. But of course, Putin hasn't just created a sort of pizdushka of Ukraine. He's created a massive pizdushka in Russia itself. The economy is in an absolutely dire state. His militarization of the economy suggests that he cannot end the war anytime soon because that economy would come apart. It would implode potentially.
He cannot end the war without reaching his military objectives. And his military objectives is obtaining Ukrainian resources and capturing Ukrainian territory, ensuring that he has a secure border on the west of his empire. And it won't stop there, actually, because he also needs to go further through the Baltic states to close the other gap in the northwest of his terrorist federation. So it won't happen. We won't see that happening anytime soon, either until he reaches the military objectives or if something else happens that will make him stop his aggression in Ukraine. And I believe that the only thing that this can happen is either an uprising in Russia, which I don't really believe in, because it can only happen if Russia is completely isolated economically and they have those hungry uprisings which always lead historically to different processes in Russia, processes of removing their governments and dictators and installing new ones. Um, or we can see something different. For example, when Russia finds itself completely unable to fight effectively in Ukraine. Currently, they also don't fight effectively, but they still manage to burn enough people to move like hundreds of meters forward every single day. I would not call, and any other, let's be honest, any other normal Western country would not call that normal, effective progress. But we see what we see. Russian meat assaults that they consider effective because they are the only thing that brings them results, nothing else.
And there does seem to be some innovation of tactics, but essentially the high rates of attrition are still there, the burning up of huge amounts of technical equipment. What do we know now about the withdrawal from Kursk and the impact of US intelligence data, or the loss of it or withdrawal of it, which happened prior to that? And then we seem to have incursions in Belgorod. How would we strategically interpret this? Is it to prevent Russian troops from being sent down south to try and push further on the sort of southern and eastern flanks? Is this a sort of desperate move, or could this be a strategic move to constantly poke into Russian territory to try tie down different battalions and resources, and of course to embarrass the Kremlin?
Well, first of all, the incursion of Belgorod by Ukrainian troops is not confirmed yet. They can be Albanians or like Greek,
This is
okay,
true.
not
It could be
necessarily
anybody,
Ukrainians.
anybody at all, of course. Yeah.
Anybody, green man, or I don't know. But what it can possibly be related to is the fact that Russians, according to the Russian media, managed to recruit more than 400,000 orcs. And what they want to do is they want to increase their advances in Ukraine along the whole front line. That is according to the messages coming from the General Staff of Ukraine. They warned about this, that Russians are preparing for a new push. Last year, we also were informed that Russians were preparing for a push in the area of Zaporizhia. That is exactly what we can see starting nowadays. We will see more intensifying combats happening in that area. So Russians will most probably attempt to use this strategy of 1,000 cuts, in different spans of the front line, trying to establish some kind of tactical or operational advantage for their troops there. So Ukrainian or Albanian army in Belgorod is apparently there trying to, again, stretch Russian resources because, according to the General Staff of Ukraine, there were 200,000 Russian invaders directly or actively involved in combat. So we're talking about 200,000 literally infantrymen, not only infantry, but generally, okay, infantrymen, the cannon fodder that was actively involved in combat on the territory of Ukraine and in Kursk Oblast on a daily basis, right? So that is 200,000 men out of 650,000 men, Russians currently involved in this war against Ukraine. That is, again, that is data based on the information coming from the General Staff of Ukraine. So what we can predict probably is that those little green men in Belgrade, if they exist at all, maybe they do, maybe they don't, maybe they are Italians, for example. I have no idea. I didn't see them, so I cannot tell. But maybe they're also involved there in order to stretch Russian reserves. How many Russians were involved in the Kursk operation? From what we know, that is approximately 50,000 troops actively involved out of 200,000 troops involved in the aggression against Ukraine. So roughly 1/4 of all the Russian army has been stretched and deployed to Kursk to fight incurring Ukrainian army there. So that is tremendous resources. And we see that it's effective, actually, because Russian offensive in Pokrovsk is failing. We don't hear any more updates from there. There were several Ukrainian good counterattacks since the last month, and we observe this dynamic combat, and of course a lot of Russian deaths related to Ukrainian drones. So that is just my, like I not like I'm 100% sure, because again, I don't know who those guys are. Maybe they were just like tourists. I have no idea. But if there is somebody, right, incurring that very place, then that could be the cause.
And that certainly would make sense in theory, if any was real in any case, which of course it's probably not. Um, Let's turn to mobilization in Russia, because this is quite an interesting thing, and I haven't heard this said or written anywhere else. But someone I was speaking to, who observes these things quite closely, said that a rather interesting thing has happened in March, and that is the immunities that were granted from 2022 onwards to Russians who were working in strategic sectors or who carried on working in Moscow, St. Petersburg, Catherine,burg, and the big cities. You know, these get out of jail free, or rather get out of jail free cards. They've expired. They expired in March this year. And very little attention has been paid to that. I wonder if Putin at some point will draw down a wider mobilization to continue, I think, the objectives we've agreed that he has not abandoned, which is to take more of Ukraine, to take the whole of Ukraine, and then, look further westwards to other territories that he can threaten, the Baltics, Moldova, for instance.
Again, I don't really believe in coincidences, and this very fact is it coincides with the fact that there are currently talks about either lifting sanctions from Russia or establishing new projects on excavation of rare resources in Russia between Americans and Russians. So I don't really believe in the coincidences, but what I believe in is the fact that they might expect some additional funding coming to Russia very, very soon. Maybe from lifting the sanctions on Bank and other financial institutions servicing Russian agriculture, because this will also result in lifting sanctions from different Russian oligarchs that can launder their money and basically finance the Russian war machine. So apparently they expect some kind of new investments in Russia or some kind of new funding coming to Russia. Why it's important is because they can raise the salaries, they can raise the price of contracts for the new Russian recruits and use this to motivate new orgs to come to Ukraine. That is again another chance, because one of the evidence that this worked was the recent raise in salaries for the Russian invaders that we could observe, I believe, in the middle of this month. Some people explain that with the fact that Russians they're reluctant to sign contracts with the Russian army. That's why they decided to raise the salaries. And by raising those salaries, we can see, again, that is based on the Russian reports, but Russians convince everybody that they managed to recruit more than 400,000 troops. So that might be another reason that I can see.
And of course, there are many stories about a sort of what you call it, skryta mobilizacja, sort of undercover mobilization. People being hauled out of nightclubs, people, in minority groups or on the margins, and certainly immigrants being sort of hauled out and sent. Well, let's turn to that minerals deal, because deeply troubled by this ever since it was first raised. Now, of course, it was Ukraine's idea in the first place. It was conceived as a piece of leverage, something to gain Trump's attention, but rapidly it has been turned into a tool to beat Ukraine with. And the first draft was appalling. The second draft seemed to be very much in Ukraine's favor. The third draft of this deal is absolutely, by far and away, it seems, the worst version yet. Can Trump seriously believe that Ukraine would sign this? Because surely he would understand that not only is it not in Ukraine's interests, Zelensky does not have the authority just to sign off on something like this. The parliament will ratify it. And indeed, if Zelensky did agree to it, surely it would be the end of his political career. No one would stand for this level of pure extortion.
Remember, Trump said in his interview to the journalist that if President Zelensky doesn't sign this agreement, then he will face big problems. Remember that picture of William Defoe, very famous picture where he smiles, like, like you can Google it. And that is literally the face of a Ukrainian when you tell him that he will have problems. Whatever other people may consider problems for Ukrainians is not a problem, okay? It doesn't work like that. Ukrainians cannot be intimidated that easily. But again, another concerning fact is that actually Ukraine was the country, the side that offered this agreement to the United States because we can literally use some of our natural resources to repay for American aid, for free American aid, right, for their donation. And it's fine because Ukraine has enormous resources that are worth approximately $14 trillion, according to the recent estimates. But apparently, Trump realized that he wants everything. So, to me, it seems that the American side is doing everything possible to make sure that this agreement is never signed. For the reasons I cannot explain, again, because analyzing Trump is a torture, I refuse doing this, even if I'm paid by George Soros, big money, or whatever. I don't want to do this because I want to remain healthy and live a long, healthy life until I'm at least like 42. So,
Absolutely, yes. Well, that's many years away, clearly, OS. Um, um, but what leverage does Trump have? Because he may imagine that he has all the cards and Ukraine has no cards. It seems, though, at this point that if the Europeans get their act together, if the Europeans support Ukraine, both militarily and financially, and don't appease Trump, then actually he doesn't have that many cards left in which to coerce or put pressure over Ukraine. And we know that Putin, we know what his cards are. They're missiles hitting civilians. He hasn't been able to take out the energy infrastructure. This winter, nobody in Ukraine froze to death, which he was hoping they would. It seems that neither the US or Russia really have nearly as much leverage over Ukraine as they would like to think.
I absolutely agree on that. Apparently, Trump thought himself that Ukraine was his puppet state, and in the end, he faced the aggressive reality, that it's not the case actually. But on the other hand, 100%, I think that European countries can support Ukraine. They can prepare themselves, and they have enough ability to support Ukraine because, again, European countries are 20 times wealthier than Russia. I believe the numbers are even bigger, but like pessimistically, yeah, European countries are 20 times more wealthy than Russia, and they can provide for themselves, and they can also help Ukraine defend itself. Ukraine managed to stop Russia when a lot of different experts predicted that Ukraine would just collapse in several weeks, which didn't happen. And I think already this fact motivated and inspired European countries, especially our Baltic allies and friends, that it's possible that when you're united, then you can stop pretty much any threat. And I think it's also a good motivation for NATO countries and another reminder why they even exist, right, as an alliance. Let's talk about cards, okay? Of course, America has a lot of cards. Trump also has a lot of cards. He has intelligence, he has different military aids that can be provided for the sake of Ukraine's defense. But you know what is the most important card? Is being reliable partner and reliable ally. That is the most important, biggest card you can have, right? And in order to have this card, you should also have strategy. So you can clearly say who is your friend, who is your enemy. who is the country or the regime that you consider a threat for your country and your partners, right? You need to be a reliable partner who can explain his position, because if you don't have a clear position, then there is absolutely nothing to talk to, because if you don't have a clear position, it gives you all kinds of opportunities to trick and fool your partners, which is exactly something that we can see if we talk about Russia and Putin himself, right? He doesn't speak like 100% of what he thinks, right? That is why he has a lot of different fields for maneuver. For example, yes, he says that he already gave an order 2 weeks ago to his military not to strike Ukraine's energy infrastructure, but infrastructure is being hit. Why is that? Well, he can say, we never signed anything with Ukraine. So, what I said was what I said. So he leaves a lot of area for maneuvering, and if you want to be a reliable partner for the whole civilized world, you need to have a proper position, a clear strategy, and you need to have some kind of vision and idea, some kind of roadmap, some kind of plan of actions, okay, that are negotiated with your partners, and your partners can rely on that. If you don't have that, whatever cards you have, whatever like army you have behind your back, nobody's gonna want to cooperate with you. I give you 100% of that. I'm not a businessman. I'm a communication specialist, and I know how it works in the area of communications, right? If you suck as a partner, if you don't have a vision, if you don't have strategy behind yourself, nobody would like to be your partner and have some kind of relationship with you. It's, again, I feel so weird criticizing Trump at this very stage. I'm 39. The dude, he's like business, whatever. How do you say that in English? Business tycoon, right?
You do, yes. I tend to think of it more for someone who's actually built businesses rather than inheriting a ton of money. But no, you could call him a tycoon. I mean, I wouldn't call him a serial entrepreneur either because, his businesses, so many have failed, and they all seem to be built along a very similar kind of lines. Yeah, he's a businessman, but is he? Is it real business? Because also, again, I've operated in sort of marketing for well, a considerable amount of time, 20 years, in fact. And actually, I look at it as, okay, you get characters who are unpleasant to deal with, but I've never seen anyone who would deal with clients, partners, even those who are delivering projects for them. If you treated people in the way he treats people, you wouldn't have any ability to do business, and no one will want to buy from you. It's extraordinary, and I think it's almost a sort of whitewashing or normalization to say he's transactional, he's behaving like a CEO or businessman. Sorry, it's not like anyone I've ever met in business.
Absolutely. I work in business since 2006 until 2013. And I have never, ever seen anything like that. Uh, Everything is based on communication and trust, okay, in business, not on intimidation. This is how Russians do their business. But in proper business, when you want to thrive and you want to develop, everything is based on trust and mutual vision. And if you don't have that vision, and if today you're saying that your partner is a dictator and tomorrow he's not, and 2 days after that you have that disgraceful and terrific fight in the office, and several days after that you say, oh my god, you're such a good dude, and you don't have that vision, you don't have any sort of strategy, you don't have any roadmap, I don't know what to say. It's frustrating. It's frustrating to see those like absolutely noob attempts to do politics, to play, geopolitics. That is insane. I don't really want to like criticize Donald Trump because people will say I'm biased, but I literally don't find this person playing like 5D chess. I don't think that's the case. I literally think the biggest problem is that he still doesn't have any strategy at all. Not communication strategy, not his strategy in terms of the foreign relations, nothing like that. At the same time, I don't think that I'm credible enough to like criticize him and his team. But from what I can hear as a communication specialist, I'm terrified. That's why I just don't know what to reply.
I think that's one of the best reactions I've heard in any of the interviews. Being terrified by Trump and his words, and even
You
more
you
so by
know
his actions. Yeah.
you know what terrifies me most? Honestly, it's when he says, "I have a complete understanding with Vladimir Putin." This stuff is something that terrifies me for real. Because when you say that you have complete understanding with Vladimir Putin, it doesn't mean anything good for the civilized world.
No, I mean we have a sort of a mental model of may work or may think, but we can't pretend to really know. And if you were to exactly mirror him and understand all the inner workings and mechanisms, you'd need to be, well, a sort of psychopath as himself. You'd be very ill mentally, I think.
I guess so. The other day he played golf with the Finnish president, and he asked the president of Finland like the coolest question ever. Like in my rating, that is number one in like a month. He asked, it's okay, it's number three because first was like, did Russia steal Ukraine's children? And second question was, does Russia involve Iranian shaheeds? So it was like third coolest question that I've heard from Trump. He asked the president of Finland, can he trust Putin? And the president of Finland said, like, no, I don't think so, Donald. So how would you react to the fact that he just learned that Russia actually uses Iranian Shahed drones against Ukrainian civilian infrastructure? Because again, I don't know. I'm lost. You have, sorry that I'm turning this into a rant, right? But you have access to the strongest intelligence in the world, okay? From the technical standpoint, okay? Because as we know, there are only three strongest secret services, which is Mossad, KGB, and CIA. You have access to all sorts of data. You can count literally how you can ask your intelligence specialists how many teeth does Zelensky have in his mouth. And you don't know simple fact that the whole world knows that Russia strikes Ukraine with Iranian drones. Some of them were produced in Iran in 2023. Now they build their own Shahed drones because they bought the technology from Ayatollah Khamenei, right? Uh, that Russians stole 20,000 Ukrainian children, and their parents are dead, mostly, by the way, and deported them to the territory of Russia and indoctrinate them in military camps. Is there even somebody in the White House delivering this information to Trump? Is there even somebody who like tells him those facts? Because from what I can see, it's either he just ignores all that information, or I just don't know how it works.
I think it's probably far worse. So, for instance, the information on the children, or what's he going to do with that? How can he make any political capital or money out of that? So I don't think that information, it just bounces off as a raindrop will sort of bounce off a greenhouse roof. The information about the Shaheeds could be interesting to him because it may be like, hang on a second, the Iranians are our enemies, etc., etc. But again, I looked at that and I disbelieved it because it just seemed to me that it would be impossible at this point after 3 years not to understand that information or to understand is strategically aligned with Iran on certain matters, and that North Korea is physically sending troops to invade Europe. They're not just defending Russian territory. You've got North Korean troops fighting on the territory of Europe. All these things are huge historically, huge historic shifts and realignments. I cannot believe he's not aware of these. So either it's a choice to call it out now and to feign naivety because it's become useful, that particular piece of information, and that's my view, my cynical view. I don't think any of this would really matter. He's not going to look at these things from a moral standpoint or even from a geopolitical standpoint. He's going to look at it like, how does that benefit me? My power within the party, my party's power within the system. How does it benefit the various schemes that I've got going? How does it benefit me getting Vladimir Putin to, just to stop this aggression stuff and focus on making money, the thing that's really, really important. We'll come back to the minute because I think that's a fundamental. That is where there's maybe a genuine misalignment between Trump and Putin. I honestly, OS, I don't think he cares. He just doesn't care.
I don't know. But again, Iran, okay. Iran is the enemy of the United States. United States enemy of Iran. By the way, I learned recently that the school kids in Iran, they before going to school, they have that formation usually before the classes, and they sing the song where they openly say that and US is our enemy, so funny. But at the same time, Iran and Russia have agreement of military cooperation. They're allies. They're considered allies, and I don't really see how Trump understands how to deal with this, love triangle: Russia, Iran, United States. How to manage this? Oh my God! If he cannot even manage negotiations between Israel and Hamas, or between like Ukraine and Russia. Okay, let's just stop. Let's just stop talking about him, because we're turning this episode into discussing Trump. We dedicated literally too much time to this individual, because uh, sometimes you just need to relax and meditate and think about something more beautiful. For example,
Yes.
like Dugin's interview.
Oh my God, not that. That's another level of stress. I haven't seen it yet, and I'm not going to see it because I don't know what you think. I don't think there's going to be anything new or anything surprising or anything insightful in there. It's the same broken genocidal record.
Well, a lot of our viewers don't know one interesting fact. For example, Tucker Carlson and some other supporters of the Russian terrorism, they consider Dugin a big ideologist of the Russian world and Russian domination and things like that. But not a lot of them know the fact that when Dugin became part of this ideological Russian elite, right? It was like a subculture back in the 70s, 80s in Russia. He started with this Russian underground organization known as the Black Order of SS. So that is where he literally found his inspiration. Goebbels, Hitler, he learned a lot from them. His father actually was, according to different rumors, he was a high-ranked officer in the Russian GRU, GRU-GSH, which is the Russian main intelligence directorate, and he had access to different archives where he could literally read all sorts of communication strategies and propaganda utilized by the German Nazi, and this is where he was literally inspired to do what he does now. So I don't know if his interview to the CNN is a new trend, okay, because we already saw like the beginning of this trend of listening to what the Russian terrorists say, because their opinion is very important to us. We saw that by Tucker Carlson last year when he came to Russia to retransmit Putin's narratives to the West, the main messages that Putin wanted to send to the West, because otherwise, without Tucker Carlson's support, I think his communication strategy would probably not be that effective. And now we can see Dugin. On the other hand, maybe it was an attempt to get the viewers more acquainted with Russian atrocious thinking, because when you show them people like Dugin, who talks about the basics, like the foundations of the Russian world / Russian peace, you need to explain a lot of things. Okay, you need to explain that this ideology, and Mr. Timothy Snyder, Professor Snyder, can explain it better than me, that this ideology is basically copy-paste of Mussolini's fascism, with spice of Nazi doctrine. That is literally what Russian mir is made of. So I think Western viewers need some more explanation on who this person is, how it works, what made Dugin famous, where he started,
I think this is
because
important. This is all super, super important because there are many other figures who I think you and I will listen to, unfortunately, and their insights into the ambitions of the Russian world are important. People like Karaganov, Malafiev, and these kind of toxic individuals. I'm doing an episode on these soon. I did 2 episodes last week on Vladislav Surkov. Because again, I mean, I was stunned in talking to a couple of sort of YouTubers, people who we work with, who actually understand very well what's going on. They'd never heard of Surkov, and I'm like, okay, if you don't know this guy and what he's done and what he's said, and the regime that he helped to build, then yeah, there's a piece missing in your analysis.
yeah, absolutely. I also think that people must learn a bit about this beautiful culture of Ruski Mir, because in 2022, when the Russian invasion started, I recently saw that video in the related for some reason. I don't know, maybe because it's like anniversary or something. But in 2022, I realized that people around the world have never heard about the ideology of Ruski Mir. And the fact is, it was only directed inside. It was aimed at internal Russian audience. You were never meant to hear about the Ruski Mir in your country, in like UK or United States or Canada, because it's not your business, generally speaking. What we're doing here, what we're plotting about world domination, collapse of your rotting Western country, that is like only our internal business in Russia. So I think they must be a bit more acquainted with that. They will discover a lot of things. And they also should know a lot about Russian disinformation, again, Russian propaganda portraying their Ruski Mir. For example, this Sunday, Muslim population in Moscow was celebrating Ramadan. Generally, Muslims around the world were celebrating Ramadan, the holy month. And in Moscow, for example, you could see thousands of people coming to pray in the Russian capital, in the downtown. What does Russian propaganda say to those naive Western conservatives, right, living in like Canada, United States, UK, and mostly English-speaking countries? Russian propaganda tells you that generally, if you go to Russia, if you're tired of your gay rope, of your I don't know, like liberal, overly liberal society and stuff, and all those politicians that don't do anything, come to Russia. We have a monocultural society of white Christians who hate gays. We don't have that stuff, okay? We're like proper folks. And you can marry a Russian woman, and you will never meet a Muslim in your life if you live here. And at the same time, every 10th Russian identifies as Muslim. In Moscow, I think every fifth citizen of Russian capital is a Muslim. So that is another lie that they spread on the West to show that, no, actually Russia is a monocultural country. You will not find any other people here. Just come and live in Moscow if you hate, your multicultural and liberal, I don't know, United States. So there's a lot of misconceptions that are spread by Russian propagandists. And of course, when you arrive to Russia and you can see that, well, it's not really different from my country, but it's a bit worse, like tenfold, right? A bit worse in terms of like criminal ratings, in terms of medical services, in terms of education. There is a lot to think about.
We haven't got too many well, there's a million topics to discuss, but I know we could probably talk for hours. But let's turn to reaction to this, because one thing that actually baffles me a little bit is the story about Yulia Tymoshenko and the chocolate czar, Mr. Poroshenko, meeting with some of Trump's associates and potentially colluding with him. And Poroshenko has now come out and said, oh, actually, I made a mistake before. No, Zelensky really is a dictator, and we need to sign this deal, and blah, blah, blah. My understanding of Ukrainian mentality is that no one's ever been rewarded for colluding with a foreign power. No one's ever been rewarded in Ukrainian politics for betraying the country, betraying especially future generations and children, depriving them out of their wealth, resources, and assets. Is this a colossal mistake by Tymoshenko and especially Poroshenko?
I think they signed their death wish, their political death wish, literally. First of all, Poroshenko is not really popular in Ukraine anymore because he was accused of having different contacts with Medvedchuk, for example, and Medvedchuk is a father to a girl whose godfather is Putin himself. So Poroshenko had different contacts with Medvedchuk because there were different undercover negotiations held on the level of like Kremlin, Ukraine president, administration, etc., etc. Because of the oil pipe. Medvedchuk owned an oil pipe coming from Russia and through Ukraine towards Europe, and Putin did something so Medvedchuk would not be touched. Okay, we don't know the details, but generally speaking, people in Ukraine who know the details of this affair, they would not probably vote Poroshenko anymore. Tymoshenko, again, she was known for different crimes related to corruption, and gas trade and things like that. She's known for also communicating with Putin before the full-scale invasion, and making some deals that would not really benefit Ukraine. So I don't really see a lot of conscious Ukrainians that would vote those two guys. And now, when they allegedly had those contacts with Trump's representatives, that is literally like the last nail in their coffins, in my personal view.
So where's this going to go? This is probably the place where we'll have to sort of end on. It seems that there's this puppet show going on, that Trump is very mad with Putin. We suspect that he's really not. Europe is almost certainly behind the scenes and in public as well, to an extent, backing Ukraine. I'm sure there's a lot more to that than that we don't know of, and reassuring them that when the point comes, when Ukraine has to give a decisive no to Trump, it's my assessment, at least, that he will then start trying to put various levels of coercive pressure onto Ukraine. What's your take on that? And do you think that's correct to think that ultimately not only Ukraine is going to have to turn around and give a decisive no to the US and probably make a decisive break, but Europe is going to have to do the same as well?
First of all, when Trump makes statements, ignore them because they don't mean anything. He changes his mind like, I don't know how to compare it. You change your mind like what?
I'll have to think of some there, like yeah, like a toddler changes his diapers or something.
Yeah, that's the best comparison. Trump changes mind like toddler changes his diapers, and basically whatever he says has absolutely no sense at all. Tomorrow he can make another statement. The day after tomorrow he can make a different statement that completely contradicts what he said previously. There is absolutely no point in making conclusions based on what he says, right? The optimist inside of me, the optimist sitting here on this shoulder, says that apparently the US, this current administration, will come to a proper solution in the end, right? In the end, they will realize that they should help Ukraine, they should recognize Russia as a threat. But before they do that, they will make all sorts of mistakes that could be avoided otherwise. That is according to the optimist sitting on this shoulder. The sergeant sitting on this shoulder says literally, guys, stop even trying to analyze his narratives, his statements. You gotta analyze what he does. And so far, what he did, uh, besides narratives are important, of course, but not in case of Trump. What he did so far was not something that would help Ukraine. It worked the other way around. I'm talking about the intelligence, I'm talking about the military support. Again, we don't really know if we will see any military support coming from the United States this year, right? Because whatever is still being delivered to Ukraine was something that was approved by the previous administration. So we don't know if the US defense aid to Ukraine will be provided at all, right? So look at actions. Believe in the best, prepare for the worst, and look at the actions.
Of course, the media, which seems to be memory of a goldfish, forgets that it was Trump who was the real driving force behind the sort of 6 to 8 months, even when he was in opposition, when Ukraine did not receive military funding. That was only restarted because Trump relented, and not out of pity for Ukraine, but because it, at that point, served his political purposes, or at least blocking aid no longer served his purposes.
Yeah, absolutely. The other day, I read on the internet, and my grandma always told me not to read things about yourself in the internet because you will go crazy. But the other day, I read in the internet that my channel and my expertise is now heavily influenced by the Democrats. Can you believe that? So, dear friends, it's not true. It's only influenced by George Soros, according to the Russian propagandists, still expecting a huge paycheck for my job. I didn't receive it since 2022. If you know his phone, please call him because he doesn't reply my calls. But other than that, um, one thing that we should remember at this very point, because there's a lot of all sorts of misinformation coming from the Trump administration, from Russians, and Russians are deliberately trying to improve this gap between the America and the rest of the NATO allies, and also between different social groups in the United States, between different target audiences. Guys, we should always remain a bit more calm, a bit more positive, and less toxic. And this is something that will help you withstand such things. I think that Jonathan Think will also confirm the fact, as a Brit, as somebody whose country went through some enormous, some terrifying times during the World War II, that you should always look at the bright side of life, no matter what.
You absolutely should. And that's a great quote from Monty Python film, if you haven't seen that. No, stories of my grandparents really does confirm that. My Irish grandmother, who lived throughout the Blitz, would quite often go out dancing. And then, of course, once the air raid siren's gone off, you can't really leave the venue. So you've got nothing left to do except dance all through the night. And then, obviously, she'd wander through bombed out streets, people picking through the rubble of their lives, spilled out onto the street, and head for work in her, one would assume, some kind of cocktail dress or something. Yeah, you have to live, and don't let the scum get you down. I think that's the phrase.
Yeah, I agree on that.
Well, we'll probably have to end there. That is, I say, a curiously uplifting place. The videos don't usually end with such uplifting messages, but I readily embrace them. And it's always a pleasure, of course, having you on the channel. And I know the audience will definitely be with me on that one. OS, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, my friend. See you later.